All right, all welcome back. All right, so this is going to be the final lecture of Unit 3. And so this is authoritarianism, reconfigured, evolving forms of political control. And why I put this one on the syllabus, it's a great conjunction of a whole bunch of really cool writers and researchers. First of all, it was pretty easy to digest. Second of all, some of this stuff gets really high level, and so I try to make it digestible. But third of all, just the focus of the paper and the focus you should think about as you read it or we talk about it is citizens themselves are not only learning about how to fight repression, right? Like we saw the Arab Spring, we've seen like the umbrella revolutions, we've seen all of these sorts of things, right? But we're learning as researchers that dictatorships and competitive authoritarians and uh, clerical states, and they're also learning, right? And it's this arms competition, right? Between trying to sort of wrest control of your state for democracy or opposition, these sorts of things, and then learning about how to more effectively repress your people on the other side of things, right? So it's been fascinating to see this research sort of play out over the last 20 to 25 years. And you can, this is a sort of a modern collection of thoughts on that, right? Okay. So it does have a focus on sort of post-Arab Spring MENA countries. MENA, always define your acronyms, Middle East and Northern African nations, right? So this is going to be Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt, you know, Sudan, places of that sort, right? Algeria. Okay, they wanted to sort of re-clarify and really think out how are different ways we can think of how authoritarian states work and how authoritarian leaders think, and how they learn, right? And so some trends that we've seen over the last couple of decades while researching these sorts of states, right, are number one, the resurgence of sort of personalistic rule, right? That was pretty avoided for quite a while. And like militaries would take over in South America or juntas in Africa, things of this sort. But for a while, sort of post Papa Duvalier and some others, sort of personalistic rule became out of favor, right? They thought it was the weakest way of running a state and the easiest way to sort of see internal revolution or assassination, right? If you could just kill an individual person, it might be it it's going to be easier to overthrow a state, say, at least in theory, than if you're sort of, even if you're a dictatorship, if your leadership is sort of at least sprinkled around a little bit, right? Military leaders, powerful institutions, uh, that sort of thing. And so personalistic rule kind of fell out of favor. But in modern times, it's sort of exploding on the scene again, as Al Sisi in Egypt and Viktor Orban, even though that's probably not a full authoritarianism, but very personalistic, right? Kim Jong Un, North Korea, these sorts of things. Xi, right? Like it's a whole cult of personality with Xi. Like they're literally teaching Xi thought in schools, right? Okay. Number two is states are learning and deepening how they repress their citizens, right? Um, they've become a lot more selective about how they approach that. And with things like AI and data collection and things of that sort, they can be a lot more, in some cases, efficient and effective with their repression. Yeah. Number three is sort of a cultural and ideological base for compliance. I don't know much about this research. I'll be honest, I came up institutionalism and how all of that works rather than sort of behavioralism and psychology. That's not really my field. So I'll touch on it a little bit. And honestly, I'm a little bit like skeptical of these cultural arguments they make because you can't quantify it. We can't actually test it with data. And that's important for science, not only data collection and analysis, but also repetition. Like, can I show that this is uh, backed by multiple ways of collecting data and analyzing it, right? And so, in that sense, these cultural arguments are really difficult to parse out with data. Okay, all right. And then number four is the heightened importance of international factors, and we touched on some of this in the last lecture about how the former seemingly strong Western regime has been collapsing, and there have been alternatives in the system and some lumping together of very ideologically distinct places like Brazil, China, India, South Africa, and yet they all agree that we're sick of the Western led system, right? And so this is, yeah, allowing some space. Okay, section two. We just want to define again what authoritarianism is. Definitions are really, really important. Okay, so they say authoritarianism conventionally refers to political systems marked by limited pluralism, right? So either elections that don't occur, or elections where swaths of the population are not allowed to vote, or elections that occur but are highly manipulated, right? Like Maduro in Venezuela. Okay. Next, they have highly constrained mobilization, right? There's not freedom of association. There's not freedom of thought and media, these sorts of things. They have strong centralized power holders. We kind of touched on that above, why like personalism is on the rise again. And limited civic and political freedoms, right? Again, association, free speech, free writing. Often you can't even read certain things, that kind of stuff. Okay. Section three, the resurgence of personalistic rule. So we were talking about personalistic rule kind of, I guess, since the fall of like Hitler's National Socialism and Mussolini's fascism in Italy, and some of the like really personalistic colonial leaders. Once that era sort of ended, states thought, let's approach this in a different way, right? Where it's less based on just cult of personality and the fear of just one person dying and there being civil war is tamped down a little. Um, and that, yeah, they should focus more on institutional control, like judiciaries, policing, especially, has been very important in recent times, right? And the military generally, especially in South America, where they have those autogolpes, or there were a lot of military coups, especially in like the 50s and 60s, and moving on to the 70s. We've seen a couple in recent years too, especially in Central America. Um, they were saying, though, that this is changing since Arab Spring. A lot of those sort of what they thought were safe states fell, right? Especially during the Arab Spring. Muammar Gaddafi was killed. Al man, I can't remember the name from Tunisia. Uh, Morsi from Egypt. I mean, it was a bit of a mess, right? Um, and so we've also seen in these contemporary competitive authoritarianism systems, personalism kind of shines through, right? Recep Tayyip Erdogan from Turkey, uh, even though India is a democracy, some are arguing like they're slipping that way under Modi, who's been in charge for so long. The same could be said again. Viktor Orban of Hungary. These types, a lot of they're not full dictatorships, but they've really learned how to personalize these things, right? And so it looks like the authoritarian states are moving back in that direction, having learned a little bit about how competitive authoritarian leaders stay in power. Let's see, Al-Sisi in Egypt. Go over most of the, like, I'm going to let y'all read the examples. Um, they're also learning to sort of rewrite constitutions, right? We've seen a lot of that under um, semi democracies or democracies that slip into competitive authoritarianism or full authoritarianism, right? Like winning an election, or even if it's a rigged election, and then changing the constitution entirely to create an authoritarianism with elections, right? So that you have international and domestic some thought that maybe this is a democracy, right? Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of that. We're also seeing a lot of really advanced moves that I was talking about earlier with social media. We're seeing a lot of advanced movement and advanced sort of e- efficiency in secret policing, right? Which is scary. Um, to weaken the opposition without full violent repression out in the open in front of everyone, right? Like that's how the Arab Spring started. Like some police, like just I don't know, the kid had been poked one too many times. He I'm sorry. The kid had been poked one too many times. And so he like lit himself on fire in the street in the market in Tunisia, and that's where the Arab Spring sprang up. Like it was huge, and they learned quickly that the social media allowed that to happen, and so they put in a whole bunch of really thoughtful ways of tracking, illegalizing, arresting, harassing, by by collecting data and by putting limits on social media and all of these sorts of things, right? And China has really led the way in this. They've had a pretty strong authoritarian regime for a very long time, and they have put a lot of money into tracking citizens and their behavior and what they say and these sorts of things, right? So that they can very efficiently find, root out, arrest, or kill or harass, right? Anyone who's not towing the line. And so these Middle Eastern states have quickly put up all these sort of umbrellas over social media and internet, learning from companies like China. Russia has started moving in this direction. And the sad and ironic thing is a lot of this equipment is being provided by the Israelis to these sort of MENA countries, right? So it's a weird, interesting situation. Okay, Saudi Arabia, I should mention, that was a lot of Egypt. Saudi Arabia has been taken over by Mohammed bin Salman, right? There used to be sort of this royal lineage kingdom system with like princes, and everybody had their own little fiefdom and their own little area. That's changed a lot. Like it's all been sort of redirected under Mohammed bin Salman. He has spent probably billions of dollars around the world trying to like make himself look like uh, I don't know, a reformist, pseudo democrat. But I mean, this is the same guy that like captured an American journalist and murdered him and melted him. Um, so there's some troubling stuff here, and they've learned the same thing. Like a lot of internet control. They also have not a blessing, a curse, in that they have oil. And so again, like I kind of mentioned in the former chapter, they don't have to really worry about their citizens' happiness, right? They're not in the same position as a very poor autocratic state that is always worrying about Like if this gets out of hand, there's nothing we could do about it, right? Let's see. He also, Mohammed bin Salman, kind of pulled out the power of the jurists, or the sort of, like Iran has this clerical leadership system in the background. MBS has sort of reduced a lot of that, right? And again, like I was saying earlier, like he's really focused on trying to like clean up his international image and Saudi Arabia's international image, right? They started the like live golf. They put a lot of money into like advertising, and um, they gave Jared Kushner like $2 billion out of their sovereign wealth fund. They just bought a huge chunk of like a video game company. I can't remember which, but yeah, they've been making some interesting moves. But it's not. Uh, that's not a democracy in any way, right? Okay, let's see. What are some trends that we're seeing, right? And the three that they point out is that personalism has become like a strategy. It's not only like an idiosyncrasy of whether your leader is charismatic or lovable or whatever, or like, like Stalin kind of like powerful. Um, they're sort of trying to get all leaders to be this way these days, right? Because there are things about it that if you can convince somebody to just follow this one person, right, despite our nation, you could get them to bend the rules of the institutions, right? And maybe it's easier to do that than when it's dispersed power base of a dictatorship, right? And they say number two is personalism as universalism. Um, and here they say it basically like can be reconceptualized as us not as a subtype of dictatorship, but sort of just politics on par, right? Like par for the course. Like not all, but most leaders in modern times are starting to move in this direction of personalism, that sort of thing, right? Celebrity leadership, all of these. And it's not just in authoritarian countries. It's not just in cult of personality countries like the Kims in North Korea. We're seeing it everywhere. And then personalism as sticky. I think this is really important. Personalization is not sort of a one way, or is a one-way street, right? Once a ruler, or on the international scene, I think the hegemon rejects the institutional rules, the rules of society, the norms or mores that we think like people won't cross. Once it's been crossed, like it's just free game, right? And there's no going back. Um, And we see that across a lot of not only these authoritarian states that they're talking about, but competitive authoritarian states, right? Like now it's just free game. Like if you're going to do it, we're going to do it. And we see it on the international scene too, where like if you break a rule, um, everybody else is going to break a rule, right? Because like the norm has been shattered, despite it being on paper somewhere. The norm has been shattered, right? So that's a concerning trend, I think, in a lot of different levels of governance in a lot of different states, right? And one of the reasons I personally think that there's slippage into competitive authoritarianism sometimes, because these democracies have rules written down, once someone breaks those rules, and it just becomes like, well, there's no consequence, there's no going back, right? And that's how you sort of make a lot of the slippage. Okay, number four, section four, deepening repression. We are also seeing that pretty much every political regime exhibits repression of some sort. Like this is part of government, right? Like there has to be some semblance of repression. There has to be some semblance of like rule following. There has to be some semblance of like if you break a rule, you have to go to jail. Um, these sorts of things. There are also small considerations that people don't really think about like, we don't want free media to the extent that they're publishing nuclear secrets, right? Or how to make a virus in a lab, or there are obviously going to be like some hard limits, right? And so it's a spectrum, right? And no country, like I feel like it's what we call asymptotic in analysis, is like the line can get really flat and close to zero, but it never really touches zero, right? Because at that point you just have like complete anarchy or, yeah. So, okay. They say repression is a constitutive element of political rule. It confers authority on a regime by eliciting obedience from citizens by threat of sanction. It operates alongside other sources of power, such as legitimacy, rightness to rule from Rousseau, and then economic importance or performance, excuse me, um, which gets people to sort of behave because we can feed our kids and myself, right? That sort of thing. But again, it's a spectrum, right? From very very repressive to as open as you can responsibly be as a state, right? Okay. And they say that you can really approach repressive tactics through threat structure, right? And I was kind of touching on this on the last lecture about um, minimum winning coalition theory by Buena de Mesquita. It's BDSM. Buena de Mesquita, somebody, Silverson, and I can't remember. There's a bunch of them, right? Really, really famous political scientists and economics, and their game theorist is what BDM Buena de Mesquita does. But yeah, so they're learning; these systems are learning that your behavior as a state in an authoritarian or sometimes competitive authoritarian state, your approach to repression can be made efficient if you think about sort of your selectorate or minimum winning coalition, or what is the type of opposition that might exist in your society, right? And so, if it's just civil unrest from poverty or extraordinary unemployment or these sorts of things, then efficiently and effectively, you would spend your state resources on mass repression techniques, right? Militarization, secret police, just like rounding everybody up, like we see in El Salvador, these sorts of things. If your if your threat situation is from elites because they're frustrated or academics or journalists, right? You can be far more effective by just collecting data on them, tracking them, and sort of disappearing them. And so that way, there's this fear that ripples through your society, but you don't actually have to be out there slaughtering people in the street to create repression, right? So you can be far more effective. And sometimes this means locking up the biggest oil tycoon in your society. That's what Putin did, right? Um, they were buddy buddy, and there was corruption everywhere until there wasn't, and then now you're in jail for the rest of your life, kind of thing. Or some other weird examples from Putin. Uh, Dropping plutonium in his water on an airplane. A dissident Russian, right? They snuck a guy on an airplane, followed him, dropped radioactive material in his drinking water, and like he died over weeks. It was horrifying, right? Or the like Alexei Navalny, right? They just sort of snatched him up, locked him up, made some fake legal troubles, and he died in jail because he didn't get to eat. So, like that sort of stuff can be far more effective than just jackbooting every citizen on every street corner. I am not suggesting we do any of that, by the way. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, we touched on minimum winning coalitions. Okay. Section 5, compliance and culture. No, I'm going to skip this, and I'm not going to ask y'all about this. I don't know anything about this stuff, okay? Okay, section 6. International dimensions of authoritarianism. All right. So generally, there's been like a high level of Western involvement. Like, let's be real, in supporting dictatorship, sometimes including the United States, especially in the Middle Eastern region, and especially in sort of South America under the United States, with like Guatemala and El Salvador and Nicaragua and others. Um, Israel is also really highly involved in keeping some of these places as dictatorships, because they think it might be easier for them to just convince a dictatorship not to fight them rather than the people who might be angry at Israel. So it's a weird strategic calculation. There's obviously a lot of oil in the region, which plays a lot of people against the Middle East or with the Middle East for interestingly strategic decisions, right? And this is not like just a criticism of the or the Trump administration, but also Biden before him and probably Obama before him, sort of playing ball with Saudi Arabia, despite what we know about their human sort of rights problems and their lack of democracy and killing journalists and these sorts of things. Um, we sort of quietly let them do their thing as long as they buy our military weaponry and we get oil, and there are big high level decisions being made. Let's see. Okay, I guess the last one is sort of another just tiny discussion of BRICS nations. BRICS started Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. It has since expanded to maybe high teens or early 20s, something like that. Like, it keeps expanding. And again, they're not really ideologically any aligned in any way. Like, Brazil's decently strong democracy. Russia, complete authoritarianism, but they try to pull off competitive authoritarianism. China doesn't even care. They don't play ball, right? Like, we're just a dictatorship kind of thing. South Africa, again, kind of a troubled democracy. India, pretty strong democracy, seen slippage recently. But like, they don't really align in any other way, if you think about it, than just like we're sick of the Western model, right? And I don't even think they're rooting for each other as independent countries. They're just like, we're sick of this. We need our own thing. And so they're trying to expand access to um, debt and resources, technology, scientific knowledge, all these sorts of things, right? And some more spaces opening up for dictatorship and competitive authoritarianism. We also have seen promotion of autocracies, sometimes by democracies, sometimes by autocracies, right? We're starting to see sort of sponsorship of autocracies where states will send resources to other states under sanctions, or China will step up and just start buying Russian oil because the West cut them off. Those sorts of things, right? And that can allow a regime to survive when maybe they wouldn't have prior. Authoritarian diffusion, we know that like as states start to collapse, it increases the likelihood that states around them start to collapse, right? Or as you see more and more dictatorships on the scene, the states around them become dictatorships. So this can be troubling as well, with especially with like contiguous nations. And then finally, just the whole point of the paper is really like authoritarians are learning, right? And they're learning from competitive authoritarians, and competitive authoritarians have learned lessons from authoritarians. And so, like, it's this constant battle betwixt citizen and I said betwixt. How ridiculous is that? Between citizen and state. Okay. All right. Thanks for being here. I'll get the question up tonight, and have a great day.